into RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
Hello to all my fellow Rowdies fans out there in the Tampa Bay area and beyond. This is James Knowles coming at you from the RBLR Rowdies beat on the RBLR Sports feed, and I am here this week with our producer, Eureka. Eureka, I ask this every week, and we don't have a game this week to cover, but I'll still go ahead and ask you, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Doing a lot better than last week, I'll tell you that. I wanted to end the podcast on a positive note, and getting the notes ready for this got me just juiced up again. I'm like so excited and so happy that we got to enjoy this amazing season from the Rowdies, and the Buccaneers won, and life is okay.
All right, I like that take. I think that it is probably easier for everybody to handle the situation when there is some closure provided by, it's not that long, obviously, but it is some amount of time, and I think that time will help us all get past what we were dealing with. But we do have a recap for you guys coming up this week and next week. It will actually be two parts. This week we are going to be focusing on the team overall, and next week we are going to be delving in a little bit more individually to the players and see how they did. So that is what we're looking at, and I want to get us into that. But let's go through a couple housekeeping things. Please first follow RBLR Sports on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Of course, you can do that, and like and subscribe to our podcast on all major podcast platforms. We would love for you to do that as well. So, as I said, next week we'll continue with our recap mode. But before we get into the individual players, we want to go through how the season looked for the Rowdies as a group, and how we're feeling, what the highlights and lowlights were, all that kind of good stuff. So let's just jump into it, and Eureka's going to help me out here getting through all of the sections of the season that we were able to break it down into. We've got all of our notes from the previous games in one helpful Google Doc here, and I think that is going to give us a good sounding board to work with when and I are going based off just our memories from months past.
It's almost 100 pages now, this Google Doc that we have. little inside, but it's getting there. I think Google's gonna start sending me an email like, hey buddy, you need to start a second doc. This file's getting too big.
I was thinking that we keep this running for the first full season, which will be, I guess, the year of 2021, and then after that we'll break it up a little bit more with each subsequent season, because that's going to I think it would keep us from getting too bogged down.
It already takes a minute to load when you get into it, so there's just so many notes, so many good things that happened this year. So
all right, well, let's get into this. And like I said, we broke it down by the section of season. And actually, it was pretty easy to do that because when we started in May, that really only gave us up until this past month, November, all of those months to cover. And other than that, we broke it down with August and September together. And everything else was just easy enough to separate into months. Yeah. And, that provides a pretty handy work. It's something to work with. So preseason, we don't really have much coverage on it. It wasn't on TV, and it was during COVID. So if everybody remembers from prior in the season, I was staying at home with a sick family member, so I was not able to go to anything. I don't think, Eureka, you were able to attend any of those events either. So we don't have anything for preseason, unfortunately. But obviously, when the season did pick up and they ultimately did allow fans, and we were all able to start going and seeing them in person, and that was much better. So we'll skip over the preseason because we just don't have anything, and we'll get into the month of May. Month of May was one of the best months in Rowdy's history, possibly.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. We won the first 5 games of the season against Charlotte, against Pittsburgh, against Miami, against Phoenix, and against the New York Red Bulls 2 team, the Baby Bulls. So there were several injuries to start the season. I believe Juan Tejada was out, and possibly Jordan Adebayo-Smith. I forget exactly which other forward it was at this point. But Jan Ekra, I do know he was out because he returned only in the game versus Miami. And so, the fact that we were winning all these games at the time, despite what looked like quite a few important injuries to the team, I felt very confident about the way that the Rowdies were playing. In fact, it might have actually been Leo Fernandez who was out to start the season. But Eureka, what do you remember from those first 5 games?
Well, it's just the starting out 3-0 against Charlotte and then getting 3-0 again. We're feeling good going into Miami, and then but maybe Miami's a trap game because everyone's really looking for that Phoenix game, that unfinished business hashtag that ESPN was putting out, and then but overall, we got points in all of we won all the games, got the full points in all those, so you're feeling pretty good. And going into this week, we felt like the team was favorites to stay on top. Like we had mentioned last time, we had Mike Watts and Devin Kerr on here, and they had kind of set us up for that excitement by saying like, hey, even us, we follow this stuff really closely and we think the Rowdies are going to be very good. And then for them to just come firing right out of the gates with 5 straight wins and in pretty convincing fashion too. I think we were all really, really, really excited that the Phoenix game was probably the biggest highlight of that, and we'll get into that later on. But yeah, it's just when we're able to put Charlotte down and put Pittsburgh down, boom, at 3-0 scores, we're doing all right. And we got to see our brand new Dos Santos. This was the big story was, how we've added this person. How are we going to look with a different offense and this target man up front? And it was Seba that scored the goals, but we could see way more space, I think, because of having Dos Santos up there.
And Steven Dos Santos scored in 2 of the first 3 games. He did not score in his first game for the Rowdies, but he comes back obviously very strong after that. And I think that, we were all super excited that he was there. He actually scored in the game against Miami, which was our 4th game of the season. But that's when he got injured very late on, and we had to deal with him being out for a couple of months afterwards. So, that's something that will come up more as we continue to go through this episode. But I think that we were all, very, very much happy to see Steven Dos Santos show up as this player that, was pretty hyped, I think, in the offseason as a new signing because he has such a good pedigree in this league, and then he comes through so quickly, scores 3 goals in 4 games, and you're like, wow, I didn't even expect this, in my wildest dreams. But I think that was definitely very good. And the first 4 games that we had against Charlotte, Pittsburgh, Miami, and Phoenix, Phoenix, then Miami, those were all at home. And then we did win away to the New York Red Bulls 2 team. Now, I don't think it's as impressive to have won away against that team specifically, but, not a big deal there. If we can carry it over most teams that are trying to shoot for the playoffs will tell you, you got to do the business at home. And then when you're away from home, you see what you can get. And the Rowdies, being one of the better teams in this league, are obviously shooting for something a little bit better than that. But I still think that it's pretty good to have done, as well as they did, especially starting with the win away. But if we get into the month of June, we had a couple of games that didn't go our way, unfortunately. So the first game of June was actually the away game to the New York Red Bulls 2 team, which, like I said, we won. That was 1-0. Then our second game, unfortunately, was a loss to Charlotte Independence, and that was away in North Carolina. We came back home. We beat Loudoun United. We went another game at home, but that one was a loss to Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Pittsburgh, obviously, were a very good team. By the end of the season, they finished second in I believe it was second in our division. It might have been the the newly resurgent Charlotte Independence by that point, but I will double check and make sure. And then the last game of the month of June was away to Hartford Athletic, which we won as well. So I think that, we were doing pretty well on the road. We unfortunately gave up that one slip up against Pittsburgh Riverhounds, although in the end you could say that with us getting 71 points and establishing a points record for a 32-game season, it didn't really come back to bite us. Yeah. But yeah, at that point, it seemed like we were, doing pretty well. I think that it was mostly okay to say what we were doing. I finally got to go to a game on June 11th. That was the win against Loudoun United. So that was awesome that I could finally get out to Lang this past season.
And that was
I've been
that was actually the first game that they were back to full capacity. It was that June Loudon game was the first time.
Yeah.
They had opened it up. I think there was maybe 4,000 people that came to that.
Yeah, and I had been trying to, get myself to a lot more home games, as I've said, ever since, ahead of the 2020 season, which was shut down before the Rowdies' first home game. So, it was really cool to be able to do that and to get myself out there. And I ultimately was able to meet you in person at one of these games.
Yeah.
So, it was awesome. I think that it was a very good time, although we did notice, the problem with injuries did pop up here, I would say. I remember from the month of June, we were super happy, like I said, with Steven Dos Santos. And then when he was out for this period, we were definitely noticing that his absence was felt. He had already established what his presence was going to be in this team. And it was something that we would all develop, over the course of the rest of the season, watching him play there. And I think that when we didn't have the player doing what he had started out doing, and then what he came back and continued to do for the Rowdies, it was something that we all picked up on, but we were able to work through it, I suppose, at that point. The returns from injury did come in handy much later in the season. I think that we were, waiting for more than just Steven Dos Santos to come back, like I said. But as they did, it did seem like players kind of, they were almost new signings at that point. But obviously we didn't have to have them sign any new ink or anything.
It was kind of a two-pronged thing, because going into the season, we had talked, or at least Leo and you had talked in depth about how deep this Rowdies team is, and we've got these guys on the bench, and with the injuries kind of all happening at the same time, you did see Neil put in Adebayo Smith up top. You saw Dayon Harris get extended time up there, and we had seen Steinberger starting as the 10 from the get-go, and unfortunately this run of play, you started to see, well, maybe these guys aren't exactly starting 11 material. They have talent, they're doing good things, they can do this or that really well, but it was a noticeable absence without Dos Santos up front, and what they were trying to do, what they were ready to do, and then what they had to pivot to. And Neil was Neil was, to his credit, was throwing a lot of things at the board, formationally, and I know or Leo and you had been talking about putting 4 at the back instead of 3 at the back, and changing guys around and doing all this stuff. So it was kind of uncertainty, but it wasn't discouraging, but it just didn't seem like anything Neil was able to put together was translating into points, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because it seemed like, as much as we were trying to fill in all these positions and doing so well under the circumstances, there was definitely a real lack of consistency. And I think that lack of consistency came back to bite us, because as much as we scraped through June, and, we got the points that we needed to carry us into a very good position moving forward. We needed those because, unfortunately, the month of July was an absolute dog for this team. So we had 6 games. It was a very busy stretch for the Tampa Bay Rowdies. There was 1 win, 3 losses, 1 more win, and then another loss before the month was closed out. So the injuries obviously were a big problem, as we've mentioned, but I think at this point it was really the consistency with the players who were being, put out on the field to try and get anything going. I did not like a lot of the, we mentioned this over the course of the season, obviously, but there were a lot of decisions that Leo and I questioned at the time. And it was, more so than just like, what are you doing, Neil? It was more so like, well, I'm not entirely sure that that's the decision I would have made, as, someone who is nowhere near as experienced in this game as Neil Collins is. And that's a hefty caveat, of course. But at the same time, it is difficult to try and work all of these different players who might be playing out of position into something that is viable out on the field. And it was probably something that we saw at the time. It should be noted, though, there were still 2 wins within that game, within that 6-stretch game. It's not like it was all doom and gloom or anything. It was just the toughest stretch of the season for sure. And, Neil Collins used this time, as you said, to experiment. And I think he found some things that he ultimately was able to use to right the ship. later on. And that's something that we'll get to as we move out of the month of July. But before we do that, I do want to make a note here. Sebastian Gwinzadi and Leo Fernandez both made their 100th appearances for the club. On his 100th appearance, Sebastian Gwinzadi scored a goal to win the game, actually. I believe it was a 1-0 decision, and that would have taken us over Hartford Athletic. Excuse me, I'm sorry, not Hartford Athletic. That was the game before.
Charleston, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Charleston Battery. So he scored in the game against Hartford Athletic to win 1-0, but then he also scored the 1-0 game winner in the one against Charleston Battery. So that was his 100th game for the club, and he did score there. Like I said, it was a penalty, and at the time I had tried to coin the nickname Penzati, but unfortunately, as I think everybody else who was following the Rowdies for the rest of the season will have picked up by now, that nickname did not stick very well.
It's your fault,
yes.
James.
I must have jinxed the setup there, because it did not really continue to provide the best dividends, unfortunately. Like I said, Leo Fernandez made his 100th appearance. That was in the next game, a 2-1 loss away to Miami FC. It was unfortunate that he couldn't do so at the same time as Sebastian Gwinzadi. I believe he had a quick injury there where he was missing for the game, where Seba made his 100th appearance, and then he was able to come back in the game against Miami, but off the bench. And like I said, unfortunately, that one was a loss. So, those are things to note. Sebastian Gwinzadi and Leo Fernandez are both amazing players for this club. They went on to make many more than their 100th appearance, over the course of the rest of the season. Sebastian Gwinzadi is now very close to beating the record for goals in Rowdies colors. I think that he is going to do so probably pretty early on next season, barring any, catastrophes like a long-term injury or something like that. So I think that we just have to stand back and recognize the contributions to the history of this club that both of those players have made. And they've done so with a very strong supporting cast. It should definitely be noted. Every individual player can be measured in some way based on, their contributions on the field. If it's goals because they're a goal scorer, then Sebastian Gwinzadi is leading the way. Yeah. If it is, crosses in because they're a winger, Leo Fernandez is probably leading that way. I don't have his particular statistics for, the whole season, but I just want to take a moment to, recognize both of those players for what they've done.
And the tifo that the mob and Skyway Casuals was able to put up, and even like Isan with amazing artwork and just so much cool creativity from the supporters to honor these people that now have, they're part of the wall now that we see at Owl Lang for people that have been here for 100 appearances or more. So just club legends. And what they did last year going into Eastern Conference champions, and then what they were up to this point through July, just offering as leadership and being a stable force for this club while they're trying to right the ship. It was. Imagine if we didn't have the captain and Leo there. So again, just amazing to have them, and well-deserved supporters putting everything forward to honor their 100th appearances.
And I think for Sebastian Gwinzadi, we will stick with the nickname of El Capitano instead of Penzati moving forward. Yeah, I think it's smart. But that will do it for the month of July. We will jump here into the months of August and September. Like I said, we did those. Yes, we did those months together intentionally, because after going through what was the toughest stretch of the season in the month of July, you have to look at August and September and say maybe this was an even better stretch of the year than the month of May, where we won every single one of our games. So I'll go through it really quickly. There were 12 games total that were undefeated, although that did include 2 in the month of October. All of those were wins except for 1 0-0 draw away to Pittsburgh. If you can get a point away to Pittsburgh, honestly, I think that that's a pretty good thing in my book. Yeah. So that's not all that happened within this stretch, though. There were 8 games. It should be noted, nearly 9, and I believe, Eureka, you have the full minutes here. 8 games without giving up a goal. What was the total amount of time that we kept a clean sheet?
Oh, we were 891 was the final. I mean, it's
891 minutes. That is nearly 9 full games.
Ridiculous.
I mean, what else do you say about that?
Well, and not against slubs either. I mean, Pittsburgh, that was a tough game.
Yeah.
You know, Charlotte, Oakland Roots, you know, they're in September, they coming from the West Coast. I mean, those West Coast teams score a lot. We saw how Oakland finished this season. At the time, they were kind of a laughing stock, but you know, Neil was the first one to say to even Loudoun was like, look, I know we're playing maybe Oakland and Loudoun right now that have some uncertainty and some you know, upward trajectory they need to achieve, but still they're giving the Rowdies their best. And so for us to not only shut these guys out, but at such a clip against teams that really, really, really want to pull out a point or more against us, such an amazing stretch.
Yeah, and you know, there are a couple of things that I would put this down to. So, as we've already mentioned, there was probably a lot of maybe a little too much of the, you know, experimentation in July, but that might also be down to the players who are available and trying to, you know, put square pegs into round holes kind of thing here. But when you get into August, there are a couple of returns from injury that are very important. So Steven Dos Santos is one of those players who comes back. His first game back to the bench was actually August 6th. His first game back on the field was August 13th. If you go a little farther along, the first goal back was on August 28th, and he happened that game to score a double. So obviously, you can tell, you know, Steven Dos Santos returning is a huge thing in and of itself. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to mention here. Zach Steinberger was a starter for most of the beginning of the season, including those games in May. And I think that, you know, he was obviously doing pretty well, but it was starting to be something that that Leo and I were talking about with, you know, him being there and players like Juan Tejada not really getting a role. I believe Leo and I were talking about Juan Tejada specifically, like, well, why isn't he getting maybe a couple more starts here and there while Zach Steinberger is out there? And unfortunately, you know, if you look at his statistics from the games in the middle stretch of the season between June and July, he wasn't getting as many touches in the area that we expected him to. And, you know, the pressure that he was applying when the Rowdies were out of possession, I don't know that we were getting a ton from there. So he kind of fell off from the starting position. And I don't know how many times he played after that specifically, but I know he did only make one appearance for us in the playoffs, and that was late as a substitute in, I believe, the final it was. So he kind of fell off, and then in his place, Jan Ecker kind of stepped up here. So Jan Ecker did have a role, obviously, leading up until this portion of the season, but I think what really did it for me, this is something that I think people who are regular listeners are going to hear me say this and just tell me to shut up and stop repeating myself here, but Jan Ecker was really given a role that I thought he absolutely shined in. And the game that I noticed it the most from the beginning of the season up until the end of the season, when it was really all he was doing, was a game against Charlotte. So Charlotte Independence started out the season not that strong. You know, they were okay. I think that plenty of people would say they were probably going to finish outside of the playoffs, maybe behind Hartford. As it happened, they finished in the playoff places, but there was a really big stretch towards the end of the season where Charlotte Independence was, I think, winning just about every game. And this comes down to a lot of players that they brought in on loan from the team in Charlotte that is supposed to join MLS next season. So one of those players was Christian Fuchs. Christian Fuchs is a player from Austria. He was previously with Leicester City in the English Premier League. Obviously, a very good player. Anyone who has played in the Premier League is going to be very good when they step into the MLS level, into the USL Championship level, what have you. I think that when he came down to Tampa Bay, he was looking to, you know, impose himself. If I'm not mistaken, this was one of his first games, possibly the first one that he was appearing with Charlotte Independence. Jan Ecker was there, absolutely shut him down so well. I don't know how many passes he even had completed in that game when Jan Ecker was playing in this new role. He came on at halftime and moved into a position where he was stepping into our attacking line as kind of a threesome up top with Sebastian Gwinzadi, Steven Dos Santos, and obviously Jan Ekra, where they would apply pressure to the defensive players when they had the ball on the opposing team. Like I said, Jan Ekra there took Christian Fuchs and put him in his back pocket and did not let him have an easy time all game. If he completed a pass, it was absolutely under duress. Most of the passes were incomplete, or if they were sent to the player, then they were obviously off balance or they were wobbly, such that when our second defender got onto the back of the player who's supposed to be receiving the ball, it was much harder for them to do that. And then we would win possession and we would go and we would, quite often we would get a very good scoring chance. So after that, I think Jan Ekra really just commanded that position and said that it will be mine. I am going to play here every game. And, he played the full 90 minutes of the final against Orange County because he was so influential in this position. I think that it really gave him not only the room to express himself, but I think that it really gave the Rowdies a lot of benefit in terms of the way that they want to play, which is applying that pressure when we don't have the ball so that we can win it back in good positions. And I think that it really improved the way that we, showed up on the field. It turned us all around. And, everything that we've said, there was also a 9-game win streak amongst all of those other games. It's really, I think it speaks for itself, just how well all of the Rowdies players who were on the field were clicking at that moment.
Well, yeah, you definitely saw a change because even formationally, you taking away Steinberger and that kind of that attacking midfield, you sit back in more of a. There's 5 in the mid anyway, but how you put those 5 guys was a little more defensive by having Hilton and Wyke and Doherty as the mid 3. Well, bringing on Ekra, who's able to push a little harder up front at halftime. He comes on for Dalgard, I believe, but you saw that mid of Wyke and Hilton. I think they've stepped up tremendously during this stretch as well. Up to that point, we had all thought the back 3, Guillen, Lasso, Scarlett, like it's a fortress. Like these guys. That's why we're able to play 3 in the back, is because our 3 are amazing. And then in the midfield, you started seeing these just motors of Lawrence Wyke and Hilton just being able to create more havoc. And now you've got Jan Ekra pushing forward, creating more chances, and it was a little spark that we needed because Duba played in this game, scored in this game, but he only played the final third. He came in the 64th third, in the final third of the game. So you've got returning Duba, which we all wanted, and now you're seeing a rise of a kind of an unheralded older player, quote unquote, in Jan Ekra. But man, it was just what the doctor ordered for the rest of the year, and you're right, we saw it right here in Charlotte, which we were worried about scoring because they've got Dane Kelly and Para and Fuchs coming in, so it's like this was a good showing by the defense and the offensive power and a returning Duba too. So wonderful, wonderful game in the middle of the season.
Yeah, and I think you were very, very astute to point out Lawrence Wyke's performance as well. So, Lewis Hilton, I think that he has shown over the course of the time that he's been with the Rowdies that you are always going to get a very high level performance from him, and there's going to be maybe an off game here or there. That happens to everybody, of course, but I think that Lewis Hilton proves himself to be just such a strong professional every week. But I think that applying Jan Ekra in the way that you did, that also allows Lawrence Wyke to step forward into a role where he can use the defensive skills that he has developed by, he was playing as a right center back when he was with Atlanta United before he signed for the Rowdies, and then he stepped back onto our back line for a couple games towards the end of the season for us. He has defensive capabilities, but if you allow him the room, he will also use some attacking capabilities to dribble the ball, and he's done both of those things to very good effect once he was allowed a lot more space in the midfield. And I think that, all of them together, it just created a very synchronistic midfield trio where everyone played off of everyone's best instincts, and it led to like I said, possibly the best stretch of the season. In my opinion, it is. I don't know how you can go nearly 9 games without giving up a goal and say that that's not the best. But there's one more thing to note from the months of August and September. This was actually the period during which Neil Collins was in charge for his 100th game. I think that that's a pretty cool thing as well. You know, it's one thing when a player does it. For a coach to have stuck around 100 games, that's honestly not that common. If you look at the MLS level, there is a coaching carousel going on right now. You know, there are coaches that are going from the national team to FC Dallas, and those two flip flop positions. Chicago's getting a new coach, and they had to go outside the league. There are the new clubs coming in. You know, it's very hard for coaches to stick around because the easiest person to replace in the middle of a season is a coach. You know, if you have a player who's not doing that well, it's kind of hard to phase him out because there are transfer windows when you can ship somebody on. Maybe you don't want to cancel that contract because you have to pay the whole thing out at once, what have you. For a coach, it's a lot easier. And I think that Neil Collins being around for all of this time only speaks to not only how much the Rowdies organization values him, but, you know, obviously why they value him. And that's how much success he's earned.
Well, and two, it's of note that he's the technical director of this team as well, and so you're kind of seeing the fruit of his labor of some of these players that have been coming on. They've been on the team for a couple of years, but it is his fingerprints are all over very quickly this team, and we had talked about it in the last show, but, you know, to a couple years to get it right, but boom, we saw it last year and just continuing it this year. But the reason Hilton, Ekra, like, you know, Seba, Duba, like all these guys that are here, Lasso, they're all here because Neil was the guy who brought them here. So as much as we love this team, I think we need to give the props to Lee Cohen and to Neil for being able to have the vision and put it forth on the field.
Absolutely. And we will touch on them, the management team, a little bit later here. Let us get into the month of October now. There were 2 blips, and then other than that, it was pretty much back to winning ways. There were 2 wins, specifically a loss away to Pittsburgh. So, you know, we didn't get the point there, and that's unfortunate. But Pittsburgh was a very good team, obviously. We drew at home with the New York Red Bulls 2 team. And, you know, I got to say, for me, that kind of felt like a loss.
Yeah.
You know, they were the second worst team in our division, but I felt like that one wasn't super great. But after that, there were 3 more wins to close out the season. So, you know, how did you feel during that time as we got to the end of the season? I felt, you know, I felt that everything was pretty promising. It seemed very optimistic.
Yeah, again, losing away to Pittsburgh, I think everyone is, I guess we got to get that win. We still haven't been able to win on the road against Pittsburgh, but it's a tough environment to play in. The draw against New York Red Bulls after blowing them out, no, I don't think anyone expected 6-0 again, but when you blow out a team 6-0 and then you draw, and in that game, we saw the dreaded, like, the first part of the game blues happen with conceding a goal in the first 25 minutes of the game, and then basically having to fight, own possession the whole game, and fight, create more chances, and then ultimately we get 1 goal, which was, even that was an own goal, but still, we put it on the board. But that came right, either in stoppage time right before halftime, but still, like, this was one of those games where I feel the same way you do, where it's just like, just disappointment, and we should have done it. But they turn around and blow out Miami 3-0 the next game. So, and they go on another win streak right after that. So, as much as we didn't get the full points and it was a disappointing draw, which there weren't that many of those this year, it was either wins or losses. But
yeah,
you still felt like this is a team right where they should be, at the top of the table. And there were a couple teams surging at this time to come towards us, but with wins and even pulling out a point against the Red Bulls, it was. I don't think anyone was really picking. I don't think we were really picking at any of the nitpicking, I guess is the word I'm trying to use. But we're still on the way. I don't think anyone was losing confidence in this team.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. The loss away to Pittsburgh, as much as you said, it would be very nice to go and beat Pittsburgh away because we haven't done that in quite a while here. But yeah, I think everything else seemed to be pretty good. It's true that Charlotte was surging. I think that we were lucky to play them when we did, in a sense. Charlotte was surging at this point, and maybe if they had caught us towards the end of the season when they had put a couple of these players that they brought in on loan together a little bit better than before, maybe that would have been different. I don't know. They did finish second in our division and then Pittsburgh behind them, but yeah, I would still say I would still back us to beat Charlotte most games of the season, even with the players that they brought in. And I felt that way, getting into the playoffs there. It was all very good. The last game of the season was away to Las Vegas Lights. It was a 2-1 win. I actually got to go out there and I met a bunch of the guys who were in the supporters groups because, they were the ones who were out there as well, obviously. It was super great to hang out with them. And, we were the loudest people in the stadium as far as I'm concerned. But
it's so cool.
Yeah, that was super cool. And I thought that it was a very fitting end of the season, and all the players were in such high spirits. I remember one of the last details from that night at the stadium was, we had hung out with the Las Vegas supporters groups and they were so nice. And, we had such a good time during the game, obviously. And we had also, we were waiting after the game because we knew that the players had to get on this bus, which was right in front of the stadium. So when they all walked out, everybody was so happy. They were so nice. Everybody seemed, in very good spirits. It was just everything was looking up. And, that's the way that it felt all around. So I was really, really happy getting into the playoffs here. So that would be the last thing for us to cover. And let's go ahead and get into the playoffs. We had our first game against Tulsa. Tulsa, they finished last in their group. They kind of squeaked into the playoffs, but I also don't think that anybody expected the results that we got against them, did they?
No. I mean, it was I guess if in reality it's a 3-1 win. Just the madness at the end. And I mean, I guess it's a little foreshadowing for what we're going to talk about in just a second, but they took care of what they had to do. They went up 3-0. They gave up a amazing goal by Rivas, but it's just Lucky comes in the 88th, and Leo scores immediately 42 seconds later, I think. Adebayo Smith comes on, and then Lucky puts 2 in the net before it's all said and done. So, yeah, I mean, I think 3-1 is a more of a realistic score of what the story of the game was, but I think Lucky scoring then, and we had kind of even joked about like, hey, all right, super sub, hey, this is the key to success.
That's right.
How right we would be in our jokes just a couple weeks later, but I don't want to skip too far ahead.
Yeah, so that 6-2 win, as you said, maybe not indicative of exactly how the game went, but it was definitely a very good time. So I saw that one, and we were all jumping up and down all game, obviously, especially towards the end. We get into the next week, and we're up against Birmingham Legion. We were up against Birmingham because when they drew Pittsburgh in the playoffs, Pittsburgh actually was unable to compete. They had a COVID outbreak right on the eve of the game, and that game was canceled. So Birmingham moves on, and then they play us, obviously, at Al Lang Stadium. Now, this one was a much tighter affair. We go from 6-2 to 1-0. It was still a win. Jan Ekra finally got the goal that I felt he had been, on the verge of getting so many times over the course of this season. And I think that I gave him my man of the match, not just for, this one goal, but for all of the games leading up to it. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken there, we can obviously double check. Yeah. But I was, satisfied with the way that the game went, as much as I was also hesitant to draw any conclusions about the future, because it was just such a different game from the one against Tulsa, and it would be such a different game, in fact, from the 2 that would come after it.
Yeah, Birmingham coming in, not having to play a game while we had to play Tulsa, but regardless if it was Birmingham or Pittsburgh, which who knows, that would have been a different can of worms. But I think we well, at least I was expecting it to be a little bit more rugged, a little bit more rough. I mean, both these teams play us in that defensive fashion, and pretty equal across the board. It was a game that the Rowdies were able to create more chances and more big chances, but Birmingham had their fair share. Pretty equal possession. I mean, it came down to the Rowdies were pressing. Birmingham committed a little bit more fouls, and Ecker was able to put one in the net, and ultimately that was the deciding line. So in front of almost 6,000 people, you also saw how important Ralph's Mob and Skyway Casuals and the rest of the Tampa Bay area that came to support this team, how important they were throughout the entire game to lift what may have been the little deciding factor is the fans and their energy that they were pumping into the Rowdies. And I say that because I was there. I mean, you were there. We were in attendance, and this was a tough dogfight. And if they're on the road against Birmingham, who knows if they would give up that equalizer with all the chances that Birmingham had. So that was my feeling here.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there. And that win did take us into the Eastern Conference Final. We were up against Louisville City for the second year in a row. We were lucky enough this time, though, to have the home field advantage. And I think just like you said, for this past one against Birmingham, it really came in handy here because there were over 7,000 fans for the game against Louisville, and it should be noted a good portion of them, you said, I think at the time, roughly 300 people came from Louisville City. And I got to say hats off to them for being the people to do that, because that's a very good traveling group. I only hope that the Rowdies would be able to muster such a group if, the game were over in Kentucky again. But the game was possibly, I said at the time, and I still think so, I think it was the most emotional game that I've ever witnessed. I was not at this game in person, unfortunately. My family was away on a Thanksgiving holiday, so I had the game on the TV at the cabin there in the mountains. And then, I still think that from inside our cabin, we were probably creating more of a ruckus on the mountain than anybody had heard in a long time. The game was absolutely insane. So Louisville, if anybody does not remember, Louisville went up in the 10th minute thanks to a goal from Brian Ownby. Brian Ownby, who was quite the villain for the rest of the game. Forrest Lasso gets an own goal in the 23rd minute. And, at that point, I'm thinking, oh, my God, I kind of haven't seen this in a while. And I haven't seen this against a team as good as Louisville City is. Louisville City is very, they were second only to us in the Eastern Conference. And they were, again, the top team last season in the Eastern Conference. So for us to look at, well, at least till it got to the Eastern Conference Final, but, for us to have to come back and score 2 goals against a team this good, it was just daunting. But one thing that I got from being in that cabin and watching it on TV instead of being in the stands is I still felt like everyone in the stadium thought the Rowdies can come back and do this. Yeah. It was, a hope against hope, really, at that point. But it seemed viable that the Rowdies would be able to come back. And lo and behold, they did. But you were there, Eureka, and I would like to defer to you here on, what the atmosphere was like leading up into the last 10 minutes, actually. It was really the last 10 minutes of the game when Lucky came on that we actually got anything.
Yeah, even up to that point, even up to that 81st minute when he checks in, the Rowdies had created chances. They had, so many opportunities that were there, just couldn't put it in the net. And it never felt like they had the upper hand. They scored really quickly, first 10 minutes, and then an own goal, and that's just so uncharacteristic of that back three. But the Rowdies never let their foot off the gas. It wasn't until the madness that happens. That crowd was never out of it. Kudos to the mob and to everyone on the Capo stand, man. Like, Steven and Mitch and everyone who gets up there and screams their lungs out. And it never felt like the 7,000 people, well, I guess the little less than that were supporting the Rowdies. they had the faith. I mean, I did my little halftime minute and said, could still be a monumental effort, but they can do it. And oh wow, Lucky checks in, and within 2 minutes they score one. And we had been talking in the chat of the RBLR chat with a couple of the guys, and I think we had all kind of felt that if we get the one, we can get the two. And it took too long, I think, to get the one, but once we got it, even that it was. You could cut the energy with a knife through the air. It was so thick and palpable that we get the one, and then it wasn't too long until Lucky puts another one in around the 90th minute, and the place I mean, we had it on video. We were part of the. I mean, someone did a supercut and used a part of our clip in the supercut of around the entire Al Lang Stadium of people watching, and then with the commentary from from Drew Felios and Ryan Davis over the top of it. We get the equalizer in stoppage time in the very they're saying any kick could be the last kick. We have a corner kick to set this all up. It's pandemonium. You got to go back. We went through this detailed play-by-play a few weeks ago here on the pod, and it was just when they get the equalizer, which it's like that goal will forever in my mind be known as the equalizer, and I think everyone will know exactly what I'm talking about when we say the equalizer. So we get it. The Richter scale, I made that joke on the pod, but it's like if something didn't blip on a radar on NORAD or something, like, ooh, there's some activity in the Tampa Bay area, boom, I would be surprised because the entire roof gets blown off. People Dos Santos is literally grabbing Lucky by the face and just like looking at him like you did it, like, oh my, how did you do this? It's so amazing. And it took a complete effort by everyone, including the 7,120 people in the stadium, as a collective effort to almost will this ball into the net. And we see Lucky, our super sub, that there might be a statue done of him at some point because of just all of these amazing heroic things that he's done. And this just was the capstone. So being there was. It's something I'll never forget. It's something I know it's part of this club's history, part of this club's lore now forever. It is forever engraved into the story of this club, and that moment right there was just phenomenal. And the energy was amazing, and so there are no words to really encapsulate how everything felt, but it was that crescendo, that palpable energy that was building there, and it just got to be released from the 81st to the over 90th minute. So it's just amazing.
Yeah, I wish that I had been there to see that, but I can tell everyone listening that I was going absolutely mental up in North Carolina. It was pandemonium in a cabin too.
There were a few capital letters that you were typing in our chat.
Yeah. Yes, that is definitely true. But Steven Dos Santos, you mentioned him. He ultimately then gets the winner once we get into extra time. Because, the Rowdies had all these chances leading up, and Evan Lauro has one final good save to make sure that, we stay ahead of them. It should be noted at this point, Lucky M. Kosana came to the Rowdies from Louisville City. So, something to note, but that one was amazing. And then unfortunately we do have to get into one more game of the season because this one did not go our way. It was the final hurdle, the one where the Rowdies needed to, make sure that they played their best game. And unfortunately that kind of didn't happen. The first 10 minutes of the game, I don't want to do, a full recap. Obviously we've done that. And if you want to listen, please feel free to do so. But just a quick version here, the first 10, 15 minutes of the game, the Rowdies were controlling everything. And then out of nowhere, Ronaldo Damas, the striker for Orange City, latches onto a bad pass from Jordan Scarlett. He's able to score and put it past Rico Rosarena, who was in because Evan Laura was out injured.
Yep.
It was a huge letdown, I felt. But, the Rowdies still felt like they could get into it. Everybody feels that way, I think, most of the time. You go forward a little bit in time, and the Rowdies are starting to have a little less possession. I mentioned last week when I was talking to Neil Collins, he corrected me for saying that we lost all momentum. That wasn't true, but we were losing a lot more of the possession than we had in those first 10 minutes. And unfortunately, Orange County was able to turn that into a break with numbers down the right wing, cross back in, and Ronaldo Damas is there again. He has way too much time on the ball, and he's able to score far post. So now we're down 2-0. We get into the end of the first half, and Miko Kuningas, one of the Finnish players for Orange County, he scores directly off a free kick for halftime, and suddenly we're looking at a deficit even worse than the game against Louisville City. Now, Orange County is not as good as Louisville City, but I think to expect that magic happens 2 games in a row is just so difficult. And I think that to do so at an even bigger deficit of 3-0, that might be too much. And unfortunately, it was too much, and the game kept going. Leo Fernandez scored the lone goal for the Rowdies in the 57th minute, and it ended there. Orange County are the 2021 USL Championship champions. And I was at that one. Yeah. But, maybe I should have switched my schedule around a little bit. For
Get back to the cabin, James. No, I mean, Orange County, of course, hats off to them. They did what it took. They took advantage of the mistakes that the Rowdies made, and they made a lot of mistakes in a short amount of time, and then it was a hill too tall to climb. So, but even in this game, you had strong efforts. Jan Ekra, very strong effort in this game. Hilton, Wyke, Leo Fernandez. I mean, you could see. I mean, even Rico Rosarena. The stat line will just eviscerate him. But watching the game, he had a wonderful effort for only being in the second game all year that he had played. So this being a Rowdies recap, that's what I come out of this game. Look, we didn't win the championship, but it wasn't for a lack of effort. It was not like they blew the whole game and every facet. They just weren't ready to play. That's not true. That's not true. They came, they fought, they owned the possession, they fired away shots. They had a lot of chances, but ultimately just wasn't their day. And the few mistakes they did make were the death of them. Yeah. I mean, it well taken by them, and a phenomenal. I mean, we might be seeing Ronaldo Damas playing in higher leagues for sure, because he put on a fantastic display in this game, and like I said, all hats off to what they did. The Rowdies, though, played all things considered, they played a okay game. That if the scoreline was a little better, I think we'd be looking at it a lot more favorably. But only being able to get one goal, creating as much as they did, it puts a sour taste at the end of the road. And of course, all the anticipation and all of the excitement that we had for this team, and we got back to where we were. We actually moved one step further. We actually got to play the championship game this year. And for it to end the way it did, not so great. But all things considered, though, now that we're able to move one week removed from that, I still feel really, really good overall about this Rowdies team, how they played this year, the ups, the downs that we've gone through for the last hour, and just I still smile when I think of this team, and I still think there's even more to grab for this team in the future.
Yeah, and I got a note here. The fans at all of these games were absolutely incredible.
Amazing.
I think that when we can earn home advantage, it really plays into us, because they will always make sure that this team, still has the motivation to keep going. Just like you said, they kept going. So
yeah.
If we can keep doing that and keep getting these home games in the playoffs, I think that we will set ourselves up for still more success in the future. And I that's all that I can, say at this point. But we're going to get into the highlights. We're going to get into some lowlights, and then we're going to get into the one more thing segment before we get everybody out of here. So I've got a couple here, and I'm going to go through them. I'm just going to list them, and then Eureka, I think that you've got some points to make off of them, and maybe some others that aren't on the list as well. But my first one, beating Phoenix and completing the first 5 wins in our first 5 games. I mean, come on, that's nuts.
Amazing. I mean, just like we said in the top. I mean, it set the tone, and it gave us hope that we were right in our projections of what the ceiling for this team could ultimately be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that it was so cool to see, and to beat Phoenix after everything that happened the season before as well.
Yeah, well, I guess
very good.
If there's 2 games that I would say like encapsulate the feeling and emotion of this team, it would be the Louisville game first and the Phoenix game second.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. Definitely very cool to point out that this is where we were at 2 different points of the season. So that's a good one. My second one, I got to say, coming to my first game since before COVID, I had not been, obviously in 2020 because nobody was able to attend those games. I had not been for the first portion of this season because of my personal situation. And I was able to come to a game finally. And it was when they opened it up again. It was so cool to see all of those people there. And at that game, I believe it was that I got to do my first in-person press conference. Yeah. So, I joined the RBLR sports team earlier this year before the Rowdy season. We had one podcast to do before the actual season started, and then we got into it, and, we got the press passes afterwards. It was really neat to be on all of the press conferences via Zoom beforehand, and then, we get to do them in person, and I got to say, being that close to the operations of everything and the players and meeting Neil Collins for the first time, it was so awesome for me.
Yeah, man. Well, and in one of these games, if it wasn't this game, it was another that we finally, you and I, we had only met through phone calls and Zooms and things just because, the pandemic. And we finally got to actually shake hands for the first time here at Al Lang. I mean, it's on a personal note, like, it's just really cool that, like, we met each other over the internet, and now, we actually, like, oh, we're real people. And here we are getting to cover the game. So, so that was good.
It was super cool. And then some more highlights I had. I was able to bring a friend who had never gone to, I don't think, any soccer game before, definitely not a Rowdies game, to the game specifically against the New York Red Bulls where we won 6-0.
Oh, no.
And, I was telling her after the game, I'd love to bring you to more games in future, but I got to tell you, you're probably not going to see too many that turned out to be, 6-0 wins. And the Rowdies beat Tulsa 6-2 as well, but at the same time, it's a rare thing, and it was amazing to watch that game.
Wait, was she in attendance for the Tulsa game too?
She was not in attendance for the Tulsa game. I was to say
we unlocked it. You no more nicknames out of you, and bring this girl to the games.
Yes. Unfortunately, we do not have that good luck charm just yet, but we're gonna keep experimenting, just like Neil Collins was doing in the season. That was another one. I think that one of the highlights for me was individual players returning from injuries.
Yeah.
Jan Ecker was one of the first players to return from an injury that started before the season actually got going, and then Duba came back from his injury. Juan Tejada came back from his injury. There were players over the course of the season who got injured and then came back. I think Juan Tejada had another injury and then returned at some point. So it was really good to see them come back, and then they were all so refreshed, and they all added such a huge boost to the team when they came back. So I think that that's really important to note how good these players are, that, literally coming back from an injury, you're like, oh my God, who is this? Who is this person that's been missing for so long? And, it's somebody that you're already aware of. But that was a highlight. Obviously, I have to mention when we were going through August and September, going nearly 9 games without giving up a goal and having a 9-game winning streak.
Yeah.
I think both of those were records for the club. I will have to double check that, but it's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely incredible.
It's a USL record, to be exact.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's something that, it's not unheard of necessarily, because soccer is a low scoring sport, and having shutouts is not, totally uncommon. But for one team to do it for that stretch, they almost had 9 games without giving up a goal. It was a joy to watch, and they still won that game that they gave up the goal. It should be noted.
Well, it was such a monumental thing that, I got a chance to. We were joking on Twitter, and then we made it a reality in very, very quick fashion with Daniel Indanino and Casey of Cathedral Clothing, and of course the Unsubs Pod. So, we're the spirits are so high. We're joking about this stuff, and we were able to turn that moment into a T-shirt. And we were able to take those T-shirts and give money to a very good cause, Forrest Lasso's Play for More campaign. So I'd be remiss if that wasn't one of my highlights of this season, was being able to work with cool people for a good cause, and ultimately have a cool T-shirt that I get to wear from now on. So
yeah, that's super cool. And further highlights for me were the Tulsa and Lou City playoff games. I don't want to, we already did the recap of the recap, so I'm not going to do that here, but I do want to say just the emotional toll it took on me almost, and to be paid off in such a positive way afterwards. It was incredible. Well, those were such emotional games. And the other thing for me that was a big highlight was individual league honors for players. So the USL team of the season, they have a first team and a second team. The first team included Evan Loro, Sebastian Gwinzadi, and Forrest Lasso. Forrest Lasso and Evan Loro won the Defender of the Year and the Goalkeeper of the Year, respectively. If you look on the second team, Aaron Guillen was on that team. I think that maybe another Rowdy or two could have been there, but hey, I guess I won't be complaining too much when there are 4 people. And the other one to note, Neil Collins won the Coach of the Year. So it's amazing that all of these guys are on one group together, but I think that they're getting the recognition that they have thoroughly earned for themselves.
I mean, I closed the podcast last week with that monumental list of accomplishments, and it just puts a smile to my face every time I think about it, and well deserved too. I mean, this was a great effort from so many people this year. So, and the other thing too is what's great is all those guys would be first to credit their teammates for these accomplishments. They would say, yeah, I scored all these goals, but it's because of this and this. Or, Loro saying, well, my teammates are the reason that we're able to get these clean sheets. So I feel that that's like the biggest honor is these guys, as far as I can tell, and from what they say publicly, like it is a team-oriented atmosphere, and that team atmosphere created so many individual awards, but it's just a phenomenal effort. And to go back to that Louisville City, we didn't have Leo on the pod for the playoffs. I think we might have to do something here in the off season where either we record you guys watching the game, doing maybe not play by play, but at least talking about it as like a going through that game and the emotions and that, or maybe just that last 10-20 minutes, like maybe just that 20 minutes and getting your guys' reaction and you reliving it and Leo kind of chipping in and getting his perspective. And that's something we haven't, I'm just bringing it up right now, but maybe we'll do that. But one thing I will get into is something we're doing brand new. We started a little t-shirt shop, speaking of cool t-shirts. Liking and subscribing to this podcast is something you can do absolutely free that helps us immensely. But, if you need some new threads, then you can support our podcast directly by heading over to shop.rblrsports.com. There is a link in the description, but you can check out all the designs that we've cooked up. They're in the colors of your beloved teams, and we've got designs honoring our proper football team, our hockey, our other football team, and our baseball teams in the Tampa Bay area. So it's something that if you want to just do that little more than liking and subscribing, putting your money towards our effort here, you can use promo code COYR. Come on, you Rowdies. Promo code COYR, and we'll give you 10% off your order. So that's something new that we're just starting now, but there's a lot of designs there, and I can't wait to cook more up. So yeah, come on, put a t-shirt on your back, and you'll save 10% off when you use promo code COYR.
And that is something that I will be doing too. I definitely need some more RBLR merch for my personal attire. But Yeah, we will get we will definitely highlight that as we continue to go here. I want to do a couple more things for this episode here. We do have some lowlights that I wanted to highlight as well. Well, maybe not highlight, but point to at least. One of them is the injury to Steven Dos Santos. At the time, I think that we all saw him towards the end of the game against Miami, and it was like, oh, I'm not sure. He doesn't look good. It's not great, but he ended up being out for a lot longer than I would have expected him to, based on what happened or what we saw happen. Obviously, it turned out to be worse than that. But yeah, that was a low light for me. I think just really most of July was probably, a bit of a low light, and it was good that we were able to turn it around, obviously. But yeah, Leo and I were both kind of scratching our heads for a good portion of that month, just like, well, something's got to turn around here, or it's going to be a harder couple of months for the rest of the season. And of course they did. But there were a couple of other lowlights. The Lou City halftime in the game in the Eastern Conference Final. I think that halftime I was feeling pretty down, and I could only have felt so down to have then be brought up. But the other one is the Orange County final game. Obviously, that was definitely a low light for me. I think Sebastian Gwinzadi missing the penalty early on when we had so much possession and so many good opportunities. That really kind of set the stage for the rest of the first half when they go up 3-0 before we even hit the halftime break. And I was feeling, I felt, the same way that I said. It was just, I don't know that they can, do it 2 weeks in a row. And unfortunately, the miracle did not happen then. But the last low light that I have, and I'll let you go as well, Eureka, is just there were a couple press conferences where I had with Neil Collins after, maybe a negative performance for the Rowdies, like game against OC, where I asked a question, that I probably should have worded differently, and he seemed to catch me at that very quickly. Like when I asked him, about our momentum being lost after Sebastian Gwinzadi's miss and OC's first goal, he said, "No, we did not lose our momentum right then. We had several chances before." And I was like, "Oh, I guess you're right. I guess that is what happened." But at the same time, I meant to say is that we were losing, a lot more of the possession than we had started with in the first 10 to 20 minutes. So it's all good, of course. What I think I need to do is take some lessons, not only from, how this podcast went this year, but maybe take some lessons in how I present my questions for Neil Collins, and especially when he's in maybe a state like that.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, though, is Neil's a complete professional. Of course, look, yes. It is our position at that moment to ask the questions that people want to know the answers to. And for to his credit, he answers all the questions. He does not shy away from them. He does fire right back at you. And that's one of the things I liked about, us in the pressers, is that, not only did he not shy away from it, but he stuck to his convictions, and he has a plan. He went out and win or lose or draw, he executed it, or he owned up to when they didn't execute it, So 100% respect for all of those things. And, there's some lowlights, and you had mentioned, even in such a state or whatever, I mean, he never once, I think, even when it was the nerves are a little raw, I think he was always measured with his responses, even when he quipped right back at you, rightfully so, to watch the game again. And but we figured it out in the end. But hats off to Neil, even in the lowlights. But you would kind of, this is a bad list of things. These were the valleys of the year that they had to climb out of. But yeah, Duba going down, we had to learn about ourselves. July being a tough stretch, we already talked about that. And the halftime of the Eastern Final and at halftime of the final, I think we very similar valleys to be in. We climbed out of one of them. We weren't able to get the third, but what can you say? They learned a lot, I think, of new things with Duba. I think they learned a lot in terms of positioning and formationally and depth pieces and who they might look to who's a piece in the future and who's, a depth piece. In July, I think you learned a lot about that. You learned a lot about Jan Ekra and where he was on this team. And you definitely learned a lot about the fortitude of this team with the during the playoffs. So even the lowlights, I'm still trying to stay a silver lining and positive guy, but even the lowlights here, we positively took something from them, and that's why we ended up being one of the last two teams in the USL Championship this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I have some final takeaways before we do, the league housekeeping, I should say.
Yeah.
Playing at home is a major advantage in Tampa Bay. I think that we've already said that, the fans have such a big impact, and we cannot minimize that. Another thing that has a big impact, you had already mentioned them by name. The management staff at this club are absolutely amazing. The coaching staff are really marvelous. They are. You have to put that down to the management staff as well, because they're the ones that hire the ones who hire the coach, or, the coaches who then go and hire the players. So it's really top to bottom.
Well, I think I'll pop in here too, because they being the management staff and the Rowdies front office have been more than encouraging and accommodating for us personally, sure, but also when I look at what the unsubs have been able to achieve, and with them doing the pregame for the team, and it just because that all goes into fan servicing, that all goes into ultimately what we do is we talk to the supporters. I mean, we along with you. So for this club to not only be accommodating to that, but we said it. I mean, we're in the room, we're talking to Neil. It isn't just high fives and handshakes. I mean, sometimes there's lowlights, and they don't shy away from that stuff. So when the times are good, they're great, and even when they're low, they're still professional and amazing. So from top to bottom, a first-class organization.
Yeah, and I think that another thing I would point to is all of the players really seem absolutely bought into this team. I think, one really good example is Max Lackawecki. He was actually, out of the game of soccer for a little while, and he was doing, he told me that he was, a bike tour guide in southern Utah, which, by the way, I visited over this past year. It's a beautiful area. It would probably take a lot to get me out of there personally. Max Lackawecki left that position to come back to play for the Rowdies. And then, he came on in a couple of cameo appearances and scored a goal there at one point. So I think that, it's just very indicative of how much all of the players are bought into the project that Neil Collins has going on. And I think if we can bring back the core of this team, we should be very strong again. They did last year bring back the core from the team of the prior season. Yeah. And look at what we did. If we can do the same thing again, we're going to be looking very good. Yeah. Right now, there really is only one thing left to win. Obviously, the USL Championship trophy, except I should say one thing. U.S. Open Cup should be back next year. It was canceled the past 2 years because of the COVID pandemic, obviously, and that would have made it very hard for especially smaller teams to get the travel preparation and everything in to compete. So I think that that's why they canceled it, but it should be back next year, and we will have to focus on that. That will obviously, that would be the only way for us to get into any CONCACAF positions.
Right.
I don't think that the Rowdies or any USL Championship club that matter, don't think that the CONCACAF should include a spot for our league. It is specifically for top tier leagues. That's why the Canadian Premier League is considered for a CONCACAF position. I know a lot of fans have brought that up as to why CONCACAF, ignores us here, but the Canadian Premier League is considered a first division league in Canada, and then the three MLS teams, they compete separately of the Canadian Soccer Association. So that is why they are allowed into that. We do not have a route into the CONCACAF positions except through the Open Cup. So when I asked Neil Collins about that earlier in the year, he said that, they were looking forward to it until they were obviously not, because it had been canceled. But yeah, that's something that we need to think about. You don't see fans of EPL Championship clubs necessarily clamoring for spots in the European competition places, even if they're probably better than a couple of the teams who would show up in those competitions, like from Luxembourg or Moldova or what have you. But yeah, that's why we have, we have one route in, and that is through the Open Cup. I would point to, a couple examples over in Europe. There was a team in Slovakia several years ago, Vlate Zion Moravce, and I'm almost certain I'm mispronouncing that, but they won the Slovakian equivalent of the Open Cup, and that is how they got into European competition from the second division. So that would be the only way that we can do it, and I personally am fine with that. But that should cover it for our takeaways here, and I want to go through our final segment. One more thing that we want to let everybody know, and then actually a couple one more things. But the first one is, please read my piece on Iron Brew. I have that up on the site, and I can tweet that out again. I will do that tomorrow so that you guys have a chance to read it. It is about how Iron Brew has kind of taken over with the Tampa Bay Rowdies fandom. And I think that you'll get a kick out of it. It was pretty fun to write, actually.
Yeah.
A couple things for...
I was gonna say you personally have a cool connection with your childhood and your family and stuff like that. So I loved hearing the personal aspect and also tying it into how the fan base has latched onto this. But we definitely have the link to that article in the description of this podcast.
All right. Well, you can get it there as well. Please, like I said, do check that out. It was a good read, and I hope to have a couple more pieces up over the course of the off season here. So. To get into some league news, Oklahoma City Energy and Charlotte Independence are out of the league for this year. Oklahoma City Energy are actually going to be taking a hiatus right now. There was a situation with their the stadium they play in. I don't have information that isn't, just people talking back and forth on Twitter, so I don't want to report anything because it might all be hearsay and wrong. Right. I will avoid doing that, but I can tell you what happened to Charlotte Independence. They have self-relegated themselves to the USL League One. That means the third tier, obviously below us. They will be playing against a couple of teams that are closer to them, but I think with the situation that they've got and the budget they're working with, and having an MLS team now show up in Charlotte, that was probably a good thing for them to consider, and so they have done so. Next year, both of those teams though will be replaced. The USL Championship already has Detroit City and Monterey Bay scheduled to join next year. Detroit City are coming over from NISA, the National Independent Soccer Association, and there's some back and forth there about that. I think that we will have a part owner of the team on later in this offseason to give us a bit more information than just what I've gone over here. So please look forward to that. It's going to be a good interview for me as well, because I'm super interested in the model that they've got going. And then Monterey Bay were just an expansion team over in the state of California. So they will both be online, as far as I'm aware, next season. The Rochester Rhinos are now out of the USL umbrella entirely. They are actually set to join the MLS Next Pro League. So that is MLS's reserve division. And I guess they, with Jamie Vardy at the helm, decided that that was the best option for them. I would disagree, but I am not a part-time owner, so I have no say. And the last couple things that I wanted to say, if you have any questions or topics that you would like us to cover in this offseason, let us know. You can do that using the hashtag AskRBLR, or you can @me, Eureka Leo on Twitter. Please, get in touch with us. Let us know what you want us to look at, because there's an offseason and as many ideas as we have. There's probably some stuff that we haven't thought of that you guys would like us to look at. So like I said, let us know. Next week, I did say we are going to be doing part 2 of the season recap. Part 2 will be specifically over the players and, how they did, kind of a player's grade or a player grades kind of situation. And that's what we're looking at least for next week.
Yeah, it sounds good. I mean, we're not taking any weeks off. We'll have a Rowdies coverage every single week up until we're kicking the ball again in 2022. So. Again, if there's anything you'd like to hear us talk about, we've got some news. Next week's going to be a great show talking about all the players, and it's going to be really fun. And you definitely want to tune in next week. So you definitely want to read the Iron Brew piece, and you definitely want to go to shop.rblrsports.com and pick up a T-shirt. So if you do, use promo code COYR and get 10% off your order.
Not forget that promo code, because it'll come in handy. But thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week. We always love when you can do that. Please follow RBLR Sports RBLR Sports on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter, and that's where you can get in touch with me if you'd like. I am at RBLR James K. Eureka, where can they reach you?
I'm Eureka RBLR on Twitter and Instagram. That's YURIKA RBLR.
All right, so that will be there. And if you could please like and subscribe to our podcast. Of course, we are on Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Apple and Google Podcasts, YouTube, and all other major podcast platforms. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We will be back next week for part 2 and back for the rest of the off season. In the meantime, and as always, come on you Rowdies.
Come on you Rowdies.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.